What do you remember about the 70s?
The 70s, I guess becoming a teenager, well, close enough. Johnson ended in the 60s. Nixon finally became president after how many years? Vietnam, that was also part of the 60s, the beginning of Vietnam, but it was like, I didn't know that because I wasn't old enough to understand that until somewhere in the 70s.
When it became an important fact, I shouldn't influence you, but when you were almost drafted, right?
No, it was that I didn't know the beginning of Vietnam started in the 50s, carried on into the 60s, and prolonged into the 70s until it finally, I don't know what's happening in the 70s that you remember.
Well, let's see. You have to keep hitting me with all this history stuff, huh? Thanks a lot. You're a real pal. All right, let's see. The history aspect of it. Well, the war stopped. Graduated high school. That was a historical moment.
What's happening in the 70s in the nation?
Oh, they haven't been following the space program, Apollo 13, the last moon landing, the resignation of Nixon, the end of the Vietnam War, and the hostage crisis by the end of the war, by the end of the year, decade. You remember what was happening to the world in the 70s?
To the world. Well, there was a lot of government problems that, shake-up type stuff going on, and that was another thing that surprised me. Again, you think you're all American, and I was probably learning everybody isn't perfect.
You know who you're talking about?
Well, I thought there were a lot of government issues going on, weren't there not? Am I wrong? Am I got the wrong year, wrong decade? Nixon or
Nixon,
yeah,
okay.
that sort of thing. Yeah,
Nixon's resignation.
Yeah, that sort of.
Really remembering what was going on then. That's when some of these prisoners were turned loose as prisoners of war. I know we had some fellows over there come back that'd been prisoners of war there. And one fellow, Lady Smith, I think he'd been a prisoner of war 7 years. At that time he had to come back to a family in Lady Smith. You might say his family had already grown up then when he came back there. Probably a big thing there, I don't know.
Through the 70s, like 73 to 75, I just remember Jimmy Carter's fireside chats. It was cold in the house. They wanted to conserve energy. It was, that time. And he'd sit with a sweater, and he'd sit by the fireplace and do his fireside chats. 75, I do remember, or 73 we moved. I remember around that time, Vietnam War ending, the thing with Nixon. I may have this mixed up, but I remember him standing, giving his little peace signs, and my mom again with the This Is History, because I didn't want to watch it. She said, no, you should watch this. This is history. And so I did. I forced myself to see it. I remember the Vietnam vets, some of them that were released, and coming home, and the girl coming with her arms outstretched to see her dad, and how emotional that was. These are all TV things. Again, TV played a big part of my life. I don't remember a time without it. Music again. I love the music. My aunt and I used to go out, my sister too, sunbathe out in the backyard listening to Captain Tennille, Elton John, the Rolling Stones. Just listen to the radio and start to be a teenager, and that's what you did. In the 70s, I got my braces. Going into high school. High school was a big time as far as the music element. Hard rock came into play. Disco was a big one in the later 70s, which I was too young to get into the clubs. So though some of my classmates did get in, Travolta and big movies, things like that. I guess the biggest thing I remember is that the Vietnam War ended, and it was I remember feeling at that time that, not too long from then, kids that I know might be going. And I remember fearing that, although I was still young.
They were starting to have trouble in the different countries where like in Germany they had well, I forget what it was, they wanted more right, they were having problems in East Germany where the people were wanting to get out of there, and
What do you remember was going on in the world in the 70s?
Ended the Vietnam War.
The Vietnam War ended in the 70s.
Okay.
The gas shortage.
There was gas shortage. They were cutting back.
Do you want to fill in on any other things that you remember from the 70s?
When the POWs came home from the Vietnam War, and
Okay.
for the time when they were released from Vietnam, I remember that. And let's see, there was the hostage situation in Iran in '79. Yeah, I remember that. And the bicentennial in '76.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the bicentennial, which was kind of a neat thing. It was 200 years
Yeah.
that we were a country.
That's
So
correct.
that was kind of a neat thing to be a part of.
Yeah, watching on TV. That was
Yeah.
very nice. How are you, Susan? Anything you'd like to either reiterate or add?
Well, they kind of summed it all up, but I remember in the bicentennial they had a bicentennial train museum, and I
Yeah.
remember going to see that. And
See, not everybody remembers everything. That's
Yeah.
I don't even remember that.
that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I remember that coming through. You're right.
I remember going there.
I think they had a copy of was it the Constitution or the Bill?
Yeah.
Or else they had a real you remember.
Disco.
Disco. You remember that? Okay.
I remember going to see Saturday Night Fever,
Yeah, me too.
playing the records and dancing in my bedroom.
Yeah.
And nobody could see me.
I remember going to a few discos too.
Oh, yes. I remember getting dressed and going to Stardust Bowling Alley. They had a disco there, and with my girlfriends, and we'd get all dressed up and go dance to the...
Remember what's going on in the world in the 70s?
In the 70s, as a teenager, I wasn't really as tuned into the news as much, but I do recall the problem in Iran where he had the hostages taken under Jimmy Carter's tenure as president. I remember the Grenada incident. I was worried because I was right about that age, and if we got in war, some of the guys my age were worried about getting drafted if they called that back in. And but of course the disco craze was a big thing then, and I took a greater interest in music at that time, so I remember a lot of the music from the 70s was really good.
Oh, what songs did you like of the disco?
Of disco? Casey.
Or did you?
Yeah, I did. I like, even to this day we have some disco CDs. I like all kinds of music. I like Casey and the Sunshine Band, some of Donna Summer stuff. The Bee Gees were just okay, although they had a couple of really good ones. I wasn't a real big disco fan, but I did enjoy the music. I still prefer, classic rock more, but I like that variety with the disco offers.
What historically was happening in the nation or the world?
Let's see. Ronald Reagan got elected, but that was after the hostage crisis. Not much else. Berlin Wall fell at the end of the decade, which I think is significant since we all lived under the fear that we'd be blown to bits. So the end of our Cold War, that was very significant.
What's happening in the world in the 80s?
Not much. Let's see, the 80s. Well, we always have had the threat of wars and with one country or another, okay? trading problems, with oil and gasoline and stuff like that. But I really specifically can't remember any big thing happening.
One of the biggest things in March of '81 for me, personally, and why I remember it as clear as a bell, again, it deals with history. I was taking my Illinois State boards for dental hygiene to get my license. In this room, plus the teachers, we were monitored, we were secluded, even for lunch. And it was an 8-hour test that we took. And I remember the girls wanted to go out after this test was over to celebrate. So we went to a bar by the school, and it was my first news that Ronald Reagan had been shot as president, and one of his press secretaries or somebody else was shot. And I remember all I wanted to do was go home, because I felt, for some reason, the history of it, that same feeling when John F. Kennedy was shot, and I just wanted to be home. So I left and went home and followed the progress, and thank God he was okay, but the secretary guy was not. And that was a big day. Early part of the 80s, I just getting settled into a group. As far as history goes, I remember that when we got back from our honeymoon, or around the time of our honeymoon, which was November of '89, the Berlin Wall was knocked down, and that was a big thing between the German East and West and communism. And I guess I remember Gorbachev and things like that, but I don't remember exactly what went on, just names.
What do you remember was going on in the world in the 80s?
I think that's when they had those wars in the Middle East, and
No, that was the 90s.
I thought it was the 80s.
No, that was the 90s.
They started.
You got a better memory than all of us.
Yeah.
You can just talk.
Well, whatever you remember is okay. I don't want you to pass unless you just.
Yeah,
whatever
you
remember.
can go to Kathy.
Okay, Kathy. Let's go with your textbook memory of the 80s.
President Reagan got shot. Remember that? And Pope John Paul, I think he got shot either in the 70s or the 80s.
The 80s and a few months from Reagan.
Yeah.
I have textbook memory too.
I remember that. Let's see what else happened in the 80s besides President Reagan. We had a black, what was that called, in the stock market? There was that Black Monday.
Yeah,
kind of a scare in '87.
Exactly.
Do you remember that?
Definitely a textbook.
Yeah. That's about then the prep look was in for clothes. I remember that. The preppy look. That's about it.
And Susan, what can you add or reiterate about the 80s, historically?
Well, I remember Reagan being shot. That was big news. Can't really remember anything else historically.
Okay.
Sorry.
No problem. Okay, now we're going to move on to the 90s.
the
Challenger.
Oh,
Okay. And help from the outside, we have a Challenger disaster,
the
right?
Challenger exploded, and
Since you said that, I'll say the fall of the Berlin Wall, but we'll
Oh,
move
that's
on.
right.
We'll move on to